Developing a writing process that works for you takes time. Improving your process happens in weeks and years, not minutes and days like we'd like it to. I'm Joe Polizzi, and you'll find more in episode 459 of Content Inc. Back when I was really promoting content marketing in our surrounding businesses, I would do 3, maybe 4 guest podcasts per week. They are in part responsible for much of our success, and it's also why I tend to sell more audiobook copies of my books than print or ebooks. Much of the audiences that I reach simply lean toward audio. These days, I do 1, maybe 2 guest appearances on podcasts if I'm lucky. I say no way more than I say yes. I do podcasts when my close friends ask or when there's a different opportunity that I'm really interested in. Well, this latest podcast I'm going to share with you meets both of those qualifications. I met Robert Riggs for the first time at our CEX conference in 2022. At that time, he gifted me with a book, and we had a great conversation about true crime, which was what Robert was focused on at the time. From that moment, Robert went on to start an excellent podcast called The True Crime Reporter. And when you hear his voice, it's like God from above touched his vocal cords, giving him a true voice for audio. In his latest podcast, he took a little departure from his regular true crime tales and decided to interview me on how I created and wrote my crime novel, The Will to Die. I'm sharing this with you because I truly believe you'll find some value in the process I went through to develop the book. And more about Robert after the podcast. Enjoy.
Joe Polizzi is known as the godfather of content marketing. Well, the godfathers that you usually hear about from me had mafia families in New York City or the Dixie Mafia in the South. So this is a departure from my true crime stories. I was intrigued when Polizzi, the best-selling author of books for content entrepreneurs, surprised many with his bold shift from writing about marketing to crafting a compelling crime novel. His most recent literary venture, The Will to Die, plunges readers into a gripping narrative unfolding in the eerie setting of a funeral home. Polizzi's thematic choices evokes the real-life case of Bernhard "Bernie" Tidy, an East Texas funeral director, whose story is as chilling as any crime fiction. Tidy's case, which involved the murder of a wealthy, cantankerous widow, and his subsequent conviction, shocked the nation and inspired the dark comedy film Bernie. Like Bernie's tale, Polizzi's novel explores human nature's duality and the sinister undercurrents that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. Joe Polizzi joins me from his home in Cleveland, Ohio, to discuss what it takes to craft a fictional crime mystery in the spirit of Agatha Christie or Raymond Chandler. Joe, you already had a great track record of bestsellers in marketing books. What possessed you to go off in a crime novel?
I think the most important part was I wanted to write something that my wife would actually read. And she basically said, and I said, I've written all these marketing books. And she said, well, those are boring. And I don't want to read any of those. She only, by the way, I've always written, it's been like to Pam, the acknowledgments and everything. That's the only thing she ever read. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if I could actually write something that my wife would read? And she loves mysteries and thrillers. So I started to try to outline something that she would be interested in. And it was probably the most challenging thing I'd ever done creatively. Took me a while to get there, which we can talk about if you want to. And came out with the Will to Die. And I gave her the first draft, and she said, "This is the best thing you've ever done." Granted, she never read any of my marketing stuff. So, and then I had an actual editor, went through the whole process and published it. And still, probably to this day, it's one of the things I'm most proud of.
Well, as you know, women are really drive this genre of their interest, both true and novels in crime. Did you get a sense from her of what appealed to her, what she was looking for in the book?
So, yes, they always, at least if you think about, I'm creating content for an audience, what are my audience's needs? I used my wife as sort of the audience that I was writing to, and probably give you a specific example. The ending, it's very important to my wife that things are wrapped up, that there are no cliffhangers. Like, she goes to a movie, if there's something that doesn't get resolved, she's unhappy when she leaves the movie theater. So the same with any mystery or thriller. And so she tends to read, she'll read a Patterson, or, short sentences, short chapters, lots of dialogue, which I love. I love to write dialogue. It's my favorite thing. And then wrapping things up. So I was very aware of not to leave anything hanging, and also to make sure that inciting incident happens as quickly as possible. And I had a lot of friends who read early drafts and whatnot that said, "Hey, you need to move this up a little bit or whatever." And so that was really important. Where almost immediately I want something to happen that gets the audience involved, and in this case, it would be my wife. Yeah.
Your murder is set in a funeral home, in a funeral home industry. And one of the things that appealed to me about the story is that I'd recently done an interview with a veteran Texas prison warden about the worst of the worst he had had during his career. And one was an owner of a chain of funeral homes in East Texas. Very bright, charming guy. So charming that when my friend was warden, this guy was the administrative assistant. Inmates run the prisons here in one sense. But he had gotten into drug smuggling. He had a pilot's license, and he got caught because he was getting a divorce, and his wife turned him in. And he got out on bail and realized she had done this, and he killed her. But then he used the funeral home and this apparatus and everything in there to dissolve her body. And as the warden said, down the drain she went. So give us without giving it away, give us the
Sure.
plot of your story.
So yeah, as you said, it takes place in a funeral home, and the main character's name is Will Pollitt. And Will Pollitt's father, Abe, is a funeral director who passes away through somewhat mysterious circumstances. And as Will comes back to Will, by the way, is a advertising manager, marketing manager of an agency, comes back home to Sandusky, Ohio, where the murders take place, and basically just starts to figure out, okay, well, I got to take over Dad's business now, and I've got to get things in order. But as Will's doing that, realizes there's some things that don't add up correctly, and Will realizes that there might be things going on in Sandusky, Ohio that aren't quite right, and down the rabbit hole Will goes, and Will has a very close friend, Robbie, who helps, and his ex-wife, Sam, who's also involved in the funeral industry. And basically the Three Musketeers, they go out to figure out what's going on with this mystery and deep, seedy corruption in the peaceful city of Sandusky, Ohio. So that's basically how it starts and goes through. And hopefully, as you've said, a fast moving mystery, reads really quickly, and you get to the bottom where somewhat regular people who are very, very nice on the outside are doing some really, really bad things.
And of course, that's what drives my true crime podcast. You see so much.
That's kind of what I think you found, and I've found is that when you see somebody that does something horribly, it's just, wow, on the outside, that was such a nice person, such a nice man, such a wonderful woman. They gave back to the community. They went to church. And of course, you peel back the layers and you find that it's not all quite what they've lived up to be. So,
So it sounds like Will is inspired by Joe and marketing. What about the funeral home? Why the funeral home industry setting? Did you already know something about it?
So I grew up in the funeral home industry. My grandfather was a funeral director. It was his business when he started working in the 20s. He started working for a gentleman named Fry in Sandusky. So this is not basically based on anything real, but I do use the city and the things that I learned about the funeral industry as part of the story. And so, and my grandfather, Leo Groff, was one of the most amazing individuals ever. And I was blessed with, when I started working, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and I was figuring out my way around a funeral home. I had my grandfather, who was basically retired at the time. He was my teacher. So he started to teach me about the funeral business before I actually started to go out on calls or, be involved in the embalming setting when I was 18 to 21. And I was infatuated by it because unlike a lot of people, when they go into the funeral setting and they're very hesitant and they don't know what to make of it, I feel very at home because I was 5, 6, 7 years old running around a funeral home. And it's where I realized that funeral directors are perhaps the funniest people on the planet, because they have to be. Because you can't, I think if you really look at what you're doing every day and you take it too seriously, it can take a toll on you spiritually and emotionally. So you almost have to. One example, and I think I use this in the book, is it's never he or she. They never use pronouns. It's always, Mr. Smith, or it's the body, and that. Once that person has passed away, you sort of detach the humanity, if you will, so you can get through the whole process. So I knew that environment. And of course, they always say, you write about what you know. I know a lot about marketing and I know a lot about funeral homes. So I sort of mashed those two together. And the other thing is, and you and I have talked about this before, if you're going to create content, you should have some differentiation as part of it. And I had not read a lot of mysteries or thrillers, or known about a lot of mysteries or thrillers that had the protagonist as a marketing professional. And not a lot in funeral homes. I mean, there's some, and it's maybe a little bit more than it used to be. But I said, I don't think there's ever been like a marketing funeral home mashup in a mystery. So I said, let's go to town on that one and see if we can separate ourselves a bit.
So what was the reaction to the family, since they are in the business? Were they any concerns that, they might think this happened here with us?
Well, I'll be completely honest with you, Robert. I wrote this and I was so excited for my uncle, which was my grandfather's son, to read this. And it initially came out as an audiobook. I think you remember this. I launched it as an audiobook first and then did the ebook and the print version about 3 months after that. And so I had my family listen to the initial audio version. And I was very excited because I was sort of like a love letter to my family, and they did not like it at all. And that's putting it lightly. They thought that I was making fun of which I'm not, and I never have been. And I sort of, I'm proud of the people, the funeral directors. I love the service that they provide. And it sort of was, in my view, was a love letter, but some people didn't take it that way. And there's nothing I could do about that. I don't know if I would change or do anything differently, but I was a little disappointed that the family didn't appreciate it as much as I do. So that was the one downside, and the one area that I didn't expect.
Do you think you'll stay with the funeral home setting? Because I really find it interesting. We've got the case here in Texas, Bernie, the funeral home director who everyone loved, and he was stealing from the wealthy widow and then murders her and stashes her away in a deep freeze. I'm sure you know the story.
I've heard of it, yes.
Oh, my God. It's a terrific, interesting story, because it's so different. We don't have that much contact with a funeral home. Do you think you'll stay with that setting?
So I'm working on the outline. as I have, you've switched careers a lot, done a lot of different things. I do a lot of different things as well, or I'm trying to. So once I wrote the novel, I went back and started dabbling back into marketing, and I'm sort of going back on the novel side now. And I've just begun to write out some mini chapters and outlines for the next book. And it is probably not as much of the plot as it was in the original, but it is still part of. I mean, I'm using the same characters; they're still in the same positions. But I heard the same type of feedback that you're giving me right now. Is it's so interesting to people. They love the inner workings of what happens inside a funeral home, the embalming process, the cleanup, the pickup, going to get the body, everything about that. That happens. So the short answer to you is yes, I think it'll still be involved.
I could see some plots where bodies are coming to the funeral home and the funeral home director and the embalmers are realizing, hey, this wasn't a natural death. This was murder, and starting their own investigations.
There's so many places that you can go. And it's interesting, although Will Robbie and Sam are not private investigators, they sort of act like private investigators in the first novel, The Will to Die. And they're just curious people, and they know enough to be dangerous. And they have a lot of friends to help them along the way. And so I like that, not that that's Harry Potter-esque, but, if you wanted to make a comparison, you take the three of those from Harry Potter, and they're always curious and inquisitive, and something's going wrong. And you take those three and you put them into the funeral home atmosphere, and crazy, crazy things can happen.
Well, for our listeners, give them an understanding of what goes into that crime novel they'll be reading on the beach, of what it takes to do it.
So when I start a business book, it's I don't want to say it's easy, but it's much easier for me to do that because I have a very specific idea of what the informational needs are of my audience. In this case, I've been living in the marketing industry forever, so I'm targeting marketers. Here's what they need to know. Here's how I'm coming at it from my point of view. And then I start to write out what do chapters look like. And then you take all those chapters and you put them into sections. It was much more difficult for me because I couldn't come up with the outline because I didn't know where the story was going to go. And I wanted it. I really wanted an outline. And I thought, I'm going back to that process because I've been reading and watching a lot of what James Patterson does. And James Patterson is a big believer in outlines. And I think that's a easier place to start than just sitting at my computer, just waiting for the spirit to envelop. And then I can start to type this thing up. So, but what I did with this one is I realized that I had an idea for how this thing was going to start, the inciting incident, and where it would go from there. I didn't have the ending worked out, but I had a good starting point and middle, and I had to just sit down at my computer and start writing. And it wasn't until I got to about the 4-week process, Robert, where I felt I had anything usable. And if I go back to the initial writings and chapters, I would probably say there was hardly anything in that first 4 weeks that I ended up using. But it's almost like whether you're going to run a marathon or you're going to the gym, you need to work those muscles and you need to get yourself in shape. And that's what I needed to do. And for whatever reason, it took about a month for me to get in shape until I started to feel I had something going. And then I got into a rhythm where every morning I would spend 2 to 3 hours in front of the computer and write generally between 500 and 2,000 finished words a day. And after about 2 to 3 months, I had the initial draft done. So it was 6 months of, I have no idea how to write this novel. Where am I going to go? And this is not as easy as writing a business-to-business book. I'm starting to write this process. I'm terrible. I'm never going to do this. Nobody's ever going to read this thing. To, oh my God, I can't believe what this character just did. I had no idea. I remember there was one moment when I really thought I was onto something and I was feeling good about it. I came downstairs and I went to talk to my wife about it. And I said, you have no idea what Will did today. And she's like, what are you talking about? What will, don't you, I mean, you're the right, don't you know? I said, no, I had no idea it was going to go that direction. And that's what was new and different about this process versus writing a nonfiction book, is because I know exactly where I'm going in a nonfiction book. In a fiction novel, sometimes the characters do whatever they do, and I don't, it just comes out on the page, but you have to get to that point. And that's what I didn't know before, Robert, is putting in the time and effort and get into rhythm. And that's where somebody like James Patterson, it works wonderfully, because they never get out of shape. They get up every morning, 3 hours, 4 hours, and they write, and they're never out of shape. And that, when I run half marathons, and I ran a marathon last year, and that makes perfect sense to me, saying I can't go out tomorrow and run a marathon if I don't train for it. You can't go out tomorrow and write a novel unless you train yourself for it. So 30 days, 2 months of training get you into the point where 3 or 4 months later, you have a first draft of a novel.
Now that you're into this, what is your sense about why we are so intrigued by murder, men and women?
I'll give you an example that happened with one of my friends, is happening now. There is one woman in our friend group that is very straight-laced. She never does anything questionable. You'd never see her say a naughty word, if you will. Prim and proper, I guess, would be a good way to describe it. She loves reading the smuttiest, most horrific, pornographic romance you would ever imagine. I use that as an example because I think it's an escape for a lot of people. I think it's like, you don't want to go and be at the beach, as you said, a beach read, and read about you working in an office.
Yeah.
If they came from an office, you want to read something outlandish, something exciting, something that they would never possibly get involved with. Take them away from whatever the worries of the current world. So that's kind of what my thinking is. Because when my wife, a huge reader, she usually has 2 or 3 novels go on at a time. And has probably read every one of Patterson's books that have been out there. It is a real escape for her. And I see that she has less stress during her day if she's had a chance to spend 30 or 45 minutes at least reading a little bit of a novel. So from that standpoint, I think that and some people actually need that. They need that escape. And I think that that's what it is. And it's funny that the whole romance novel with my other friend, that I would have never expected that. But that's something that's her escape. And so I think the same thing goes for murder novels.
Well, one of the things I've seen based on research is that in periods of anxiety and stress, a lot of that these days, the appetite for crime novels and true crime increases significantly.
Why do you think that is? Is that just because it is a de-stressor? It does relieve that anxiety? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you feel like that if you're reading police procedurals and where there is an ending and stuff, maybe it restores faith that things will get better, things will work their way out. Now, my interest in what I do, I'm really interested in what makes these criminals tick, the mind of the murderer. And I think deep down that many people are like, do I know somebody like that? Or could that person in bed with me, my spouse or significant other, could they have murder on their heart? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But hey, I did want to tell you, I want to share with you, because I'm always doing research and stuff, but I was reading P.D. James, the great British true crime writer from, 19th century, something like that. But what I really found interesting, she says, the most dangerous emotion is love. And she says the L word covers all motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, and lucre, which is the love of money. And I thought that really kind of sums it up. I mean, those are part of every kind of true crime story, and also in crime novels that you encounter.
I love that. That sounds perfect. Absolutely. And that's what's funny is that that's probably the same for The Will to Die. It involved money issues, love, unrequited love, loss of some kind. Yes, absolutely, to a T.
I interviewed an author here recently that does crime novels. They're really very closely based on real criminal cases, but he'll change things. But what really is, God, it astonished me. He just sits down at the typewriter and starts. No outline, nothing. Just starts going, and wherever it may. And I thought, wow, that's some discipline right there.
You know, what's interesting. I love that there's no one right way to write a novel in my experience and in reading, even On Writing by Stephen King or whatever you look up to the novelists. The only thing that is the same thing that runs throughout all these novelists is they do it every day. They do it consistently over a long period of time. Some of them use novels. Some of them just sit down. Some of them have 5 going at a time. Some of them just work on one and then work on the next one. So they're all different, except for that sometime during the day, they sit down in front of a typewriter or a computer and they write. And so that's where I was like, if you want to do it, anybody can do it, but you just have to put in the work and the time.
I try to block out the calendar with quiet time in the mornings. The phone is off, everything. And because I, do a lot of research as well and stuff. But for the writing, you got to tune everything else out.
I think first thing in the morning, it works the same for me. It's very difficult for me in the afternoon at all to write something that will end up being a thing. It's like and I think a lot of it is that in my writing career, if I set myself to do this every morning, whatever happens while I'm sleeping in the middle of the night, I generally, if I'm programming myself this way, it works in my favor, so that when I get up and I'll get my cup of coffee and I'll sit down and I'm ready to go, and whatever was working the night before just starts to unleash itself on the page. Which I don't know why that works. You probably do more than I do, but you get into that rhythm and then you need it. And you feel like if you skip a day, you've done something bad. Just like I didn't go work out today. So you need to do that every day.
I am the benefactor of honing the craft over so many years in newsrooms where it's chaos, absolute chaos. And in television news, people might not realize this, you write for the ear. And if you went into a large television newsroom on deadlines, everybody's talking out loud to themselves because they're writing as, how does this sound? Turning phrases. You'd walk in there and think, I've walked into an asylum or something. But that has been helpful for me, just covering the White House, other places. And then, as you sit there, having to write a story on a notepad or something in chaos is very helpful. But now I value the quiet time and no distractions. You just can't have distractions and do this.
A lot of people, they get up in the morning and they'll look at email or social. Oh, that's a big no-no. You cannot let your brain go there.
Yeah.
You have to stay go spend your quiet time, go do whatever you have to do. And then you can push that off to later. It's very tough on the inspirational process if you let that come between you and your writing.
Do you pay much attention to real crime news and you're always sort of open to inspiration, or you're just going to let it happen in your head?
If news gets to me through other people, then fine. I'll listen to it. Somebody will tell me a story. Did you hear about this? Whatever. And maybe some of that's inspirational. I have divorced myself from a lot of the social media that's out there. Most of the news that I get comes from the newspaper or newsletters that I trust. I do not ever watch the news. I'll listen to podcasts, but most of it's funny if I'm listening to something, it's probably nonfiction. I don't listen to a lot of, now I like to read, for whatever it is, I like to read the fiction stuff, but most of the stuff, my inspiration comes from reading while I'm reading other books. Absolutely. So, and I never did that. When I was probably all the way up to 30, I was not a reader of a tremendous amount of books, and my wife got me hooked on it. I think it was some vacation we went on, and I really liked that mystery. I think it was a Grisham book or something like that. And I'm like, wow, I like myself better when I'm reading these books. I like how my mind works a little bit better. So I always have a book going now, and always try to spend at least 20 minutes a day or more into some kind of a book. I just think I'm a better person. But I think that from there, I don't know why it's not a direct tie either. If I'm reading something and I get an idea, it's just for whatever reason I got into that state of reading a book and my brain goes in a different direction, and then I'll go ahead and I'll write the note down so that I can come back to it later. Or I've got the note as I do a lot of thinking in the shower as well. And we put a little notepad up in the shower because I make notes on that as well. Who knows? I want to make sure that I take it down whenever I can. The idea comes into my head.
Do you ever find yourself thinking, wow, I might could get away with this. I might could get away with a real crime like this?
No, but I do say I think this is going to happen, or I think it could happen. Like with The Will to Die, I really believe that stuff could happen. Like everything that happened in that book, I believe that it could happen, or I've heard somebody talk about it, or I've seen something around it happen. I don't want to ever say, oh my God, there's no way. And a lot of the book involved technology. So even so it's been 5 years since I've really worked on that book. I'd have to really think differently about how I would employ technology. And actually, I'm really in the next book. It's going to be interesting, especially with all the AI stuff that comes in. Because if I'm talking about marketing and what's going on with AI, I've got to really be careful. I don't want to date the book because technology only happened during this point in time. There was a book that I read recently. I don't know if it was I can't remember which one it was. I'll have to get back to you on it. But it took place in 1994 or 1995, before like heavy usage of cell phones or social media. And I was like, wow, that's a great place. That's just a perfect place, because you didn't have, like, you didn't know where people were, or you didn't have that tracking technology and other things. So it's a fun place. I would be interested in going back to a time. That's why when we were in the book, when I would write in the 70s or in the 80s, it's enjoyable. There's no cell phones going on. There's no social media. There's no technology. It's like we're going out. People don't know where we're at. There's a lot of freedom when you can write without those constraints.
Well, there was one thing in The Will to Die that struck a responsive chord with me. I'm not going to give the story away, but it is the buying of life insurance policies. That's happened in real life, those abuses.
So that actually comes from, we sat down with our insurance agent years ago, and they brought up this reverse life insurance thing, against your reverse insurance against real estate property and the whole thing, which a lot of people do, unfortunately. And I didn't know about it at the time. And I started researching and like, oh my God, this is a thing. And oh my God, there's people that are really getting taken advantage of. I'm like, oh, I could see this happening. And of course, inserted that in. So again, to your point, a lot of these things could happen, are happening. I just don't want to be the one doing it.
Yeah, I've got a recent episode up about a series of murders in Malibu. And the perpetrator, it was all about insurance. And even his family had a long, long history of insurance fraud. He had learned from the best, except he elevated his to life insurance murders. And the one he really gets him caught, he's got an $800,000 life insurance policy that he just has paid off a few weeks before his wife and stepson, pretty new wife, mysteriously drowned while they're out with him.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy.
Well, I appreciate you talking with us. And before we close out here, I want you to give a pitch for your Orange Foundation. Tell my listeners what you do and how they can help out.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. The Orange Effect Foundation, theorangeeffect.org, EFFECT. We've been working on this little cause, my wife and I, since 2007. Our son at the time we did this was 6 years old, now is almost 23, but was diagnosed on the autism spectrum When we got into that process, realized that how difficult it was. We had the means, which was great. We had intensive speech and play therapy, and came through that whole process. Went through a tutor in a school until 8 years old, then didn't need one. Started saying more and more words, and really is doing wonderfully well because of that speech and play therapy. And then during that process, we found out a lot of families couldn't afford that. A lot of families who their kids are diagnosed, they really need this speech therapy and they can't get it because insurance doesn't cover it, and they need to put food on the table. And that's tragic if you can't get that therapy that you need. So we created Orange Effect Foundation to be a sort of a last resort for people who can't, people, families, kids who can't get this type of therapy or technology. So we've been doing this officially as a 501c3 since 2014, and we have grants out to over 400 kids in 39 states. And we just raise as much money as we can to make sure that these kids get the speech therapy they need to be whatever kind of normal they want to be, just so they can communicate more effectively. And it's a passion we all have. And if anybody's interested, just look us up at theorangeeffect.org. And we fundraise all year long and have been for the last 18 years.
I'll add my insights from my reporter's notebook. For years in the prison systems, I've seen so many cases of inmates that have learning differences, speech difficulties and all, that it contributed to the reason they're in prison. And if we can get these people help as children, it'll be one less prison bed that taxpayers have to take care of. So, Joe, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this podcast from Robert Riggs. For more on Robert's podcast, please search for True Crime Reporter on your favorite pod player or go to truecrimereporter.com. At the end there, we talk about our foundation, the Orange Effect Foundation for Speech Therapy. Please check us out and donate at theorangeeffect.org to support our kids. And if you'd like more of my shenanigans, please go to joepolizzi.com and subscribe to my Orange Letter newsletter. And when you subscribe, you'll get both my goal-setting guide and my financial diversification guide after you sign up. This is Joe Polizzi. Remember, success in content comes from consistency, creativity, and community. Keep creating, keep connecting, and we'll see you next Monday. Stay inspired.